There is a strange kind of person who appears throughout all of human history. He shows up in royal courts and fairy tales, in philosophy and religion, in the tarot and in your own mirror. He is laughed at, dismissed, and underestimated. And yet somehow, he is the one who always speaks the truth. He is the one who survives. He is the fool. And his psychology runs deeper than you think. Everyone is someone's fool. Picture this. You are sitting in a room full of people. A conversation is happening, and you feel the pull to say something you believe, something you are sure about. So you say it, and the room goes quiet. Not the kind of quiet that means people are impressed, the kind that means you have just revealed something about yourself that everyone else already knew, except you. That silence is the sound of foolishness arriving, and it does not knock before it enters. At some point in your life, you have been the fool, not because you are unintelligent, not because you lack ability, but because you were certain when you should have been curious, confident when you should have been cautious, loud when the moment called for listening. And here is the uncomfortable part. You did not know it at the time. That is what makes it foolishness. It is invisible to the person wearing it. But this video is not about mocking the fool. It is not about pointing fingers or making you feel small. Because the deeper you look into the psychology of the fool, the more you realize something that most people never consider. The fool is not just a figure of ridicule. He is one of the most powerful archetypes in human history. He appears in every culture, every religion, every philosophical tradition. He is in the stories we tell our children. He is in the cards we deal. He is in the myths that shape civilizations. And when you understand him, truly understand him, you begin to see that the fool holds a mirror up to everyone, including you, including me. So let us take that journey. Let us look into the psychology of the fool, not from the outside, where it is easy to laugh, but from the inside, where it gets uncomfortably honest. Because sometimes the person who looks the most foolish in the room is the only one brave enough to be real. What makes a fool? The word fool comes from the Latin follis. It means a pair of bellows, a bag of air, something that puffs and expels, full of nothing. When the word was extended to people, it described someone empty-headed, insubstantial, a person whose thoughts were as weightless as the air they breathed. But there is something hidden in that definition, because a bellows is not just emptiness. A bellows is what starts the fire. Without it, there is no spark, no flame, no combustion. The very thing dismissed as empty is the thing that brings heat and light into being. And that is the paradox at the heart of every fool. They appear to carry nothing, but they ignite everything. Throughout history, the fool has been described in many ways. He is dull-witted. He is simple. He cannot follow the rules or meet the expectations of society. He stumbles where others walk carefully. He says the wrong thing at the wrong time, but he also has something that the careful, the controlled, and the calculating do not. He has a simplicity of heart, an innocence that is not about naivety, but about an unfiltered way of seeing the world. He does not play the game because he does not recognize the game exists, and in that blindness, he sometimes sees more clearly than anyone else in the room. You know someone like this. Maybe you are someone like this. The person who says the thing that everyone is thinking, but no one will speak. The person who walks into a situation with no pretense and accidentally reveals the truth just by being themselves. The fool is not defined by a lack of intelligence. He is defined by a lack of disguise. And in a world where almost everyone is performing, that kind of rawness is either the most foolish thing you can do or the most courageous. It depends entirely on who is watching. The Dunning-Kruger trap. Imagine you have just learned something new, a skill, a subject, a craft. You have spent perhaps a few days with it, maybe a week, and already something strange begins to happen. You feel like you understand it. Not just the basics. You feel like you understand it deeply. You start giving advice. You start correcting others. You carry yourself with a quiet confidence that says, "I know what I am doing." But you do not. This is one of the most well-documented patterns in human psychology. It is called the Dunning-Kruger effect, named after two researchers who published their findings in 1999. David Dunning and Justin Kruger discovered something remarkable. People with the least amount of knowledge in a given area were consistently the most confident about their abilities, and the people with the most knowledge were the most uncertain. Think about that for a moment. The person in the room who is most sure of themselves is often the one who knows the least. And the person who hesitates, who second-guesses, who qualifies every statement with maybe or I think, is often the one who understands the subject most deeply. This is the architecture of foolishness. It is not built on stupidity. It is built on a gap between what you know and what you think you know. And the wider that gap, the more confidently you walk through the world, never realizing you are heading in the wrong direction. You have seen this in people around you. The co-worker who dominates every meeting with ideas that sound impressive but collapse under the slightest scrutiny. The friend who is always certain about things they have barely researched. The voice on the internet that speaks with absolute authority on a topic they encountered yesterday. But here is the part that makes this truly uncomfortable. You have also been that person. We all have. There are areas of your life right now where you are more confident than you should be. Subjects you believe you understand, that you have barely scratched the surface of. Opinions you hold tightly, that you have never seriously questioned. The Dunning-Kruger effect is not something that happens to other people. It is something that lives inside every human mind. The only defense against it is the one thing it actively prevents: the willingness to ask yourself a simple question. What if I am wrong? The fool does not ask that question, and that is exactly what makes him a fool. Confirmation bias. There is a voice inside your head that you trust more than any other. It agrees with everything you already believe. It filters every new piece of information through a single question. Does this confirm what I already think? If it does, the voice says yes, this is true. If it does not, the voice says ignore that, it is wrong. This voice feels like wisdom. It feels like discernment, but it is neither. It is confirmation bias. And it is one of the quietest, most persistent forms of foolishness that exists. Psychologists have studied this for decades. When people are given evidence that supports their existing beliefs, they accept it quickly, uncritically, and with satisfaction. When they are given evidence that contradicts their beliefs, they scrutinize it. They look for flaws. They dismiss it, not because the evidence is weaker, but because it threatens something they are not willing to let go of. You do this, not occasionally, constantly. Every day, your mind is sorting the world into two categories: things that feel right because they match what you already believe, and things that feel wrong because they do not. This is how a person can be highly intelligent and deeply foolish at the same time. Intelligence does not protect you from confirmation bias. In many cases, it makes it worse, because the smarter you are, the better you are at constructing arguments that justify whatever you already wanted to believe. You are not reasoning, you are rationalizing, and you are doing it so skillfully that you cannot tell the difference. The fool who seeks validation instead of truth is not just the person shouting on the internet. It is the person who reads only books that agree with them. The person who surrounds themselves with voices that echo their own. The person who mistakes comfort for correctness. And the most dangerous part is that it feels like thinking. It feels like you are being rational, careful, and discerning. But you are building a wall around yourself, brick by brick, and calling it a window. The only way out is to deliberately seek out what makes you uncomfortable, to sit with ideas that challenge you, not to defeat them, but to understand them. The fool builds a prison of certainty. The wise person knows that the door was never locked. The illusion of control. There is a feeling you get when things are going well, when your plans are working, when the world seems to respond to your effort and your will. It is the feeling that you are in control, that you are steering your life with precision and intention, that the outcomes you experience are the direct result of your choices. And some of that is true, some of it. But the human mind has a tendency to take that kernel of truth and inflate it into something far larger than reality supports. Psychologists call it the illusion of control. It is the belief that you can influence outcomes that are, in fact, beyond your influence, that your skill matters in situations governed by chance, that your effort determines results in systems far too complex for any individual to direct. You see this in the gambler who believes his ritual matters, the way he holds the dice, the seat he chooses, the pattern he follows. None of it changes the odds, but the ritual gives him something more powerful than probability. It gives him the feeling that he is not at the mercy of the universe, and that feeling is addictive. But the gambler is not alone in this. The executive who believes her company's success is entirely due to her leadership. The student who thinks his study method is the reason he passed, not the generous curve. The person who takes credit for the sunrise because they happen to wake up early. We are all, in small ways, performing rituals and calling them strategy, taking credit for luck and calling it effort, mistaking correlation for control. This is a quiet form of foolishness. It does not announce itself. It does not look reckless or impulsive. It looks competent. It looks confident. And that is what makes it dangerous, because the moment the illusion breaks, the moment something happens that you genuinely cannot control, the fall is devastating. Not because the event itself is so terrible, but because you built your entire identity on the belief that it could not happen. The wise person plans carefully, but holds the plan loosely. The fool grips tightly and calls it strength. And when the wind changes, as it always does, the one who gripped the hardest is the one who loses the most. Socrates, the wisest fool who ever lived. In ancient Athens, a man named Socrates walked through the streets and asked people questions. Not the kind of questions that had simple answers, the kind that unraveled everything a person thought they knew. He would approach someone respected, someone considered wise, a politician, a poet, a craftsman, and he would ask them to explain the very thing they claimed to understand. And one by one, they could not. The politician who spoke about justice could not define it. The poet who wrote about beauty could not explain it. The craftsman who built with purpose could not articulate what purpose meant. Socrates did not humiliate them. He simply kept asking. And in the asking, the gaps revealed themselves. What made Socrates different was not that he had answers. He did not. What made him different was that he knew he did not. He once said that if he was the wisest man in Athens, it was only because he alone was aware of his own ignorance. Everyone else believed they knew something. Socrates believed he knew nothing. And in that belief, paradoxically, he found the beginning of wisdom. The people of Athens did not appreciate this. His method of questioning made powerful men look foolish, and powerful men do not enjoy looking foolish. Eventually, he was put on trial. The charge was corrupting the youth. The real crime was making people uncomfortable with their own certainty. He was sentenced to death. And he accepted it, not because he believed the verdict was just, but because he believed that a life lived without questioning was not a life worth living. He drank the hemlock calmly, and in doing so, the man who called himself the greatest fool in Athens became the foundation of Western philosophy. Think about that. The man who built his entire life on the admission that he knew nothing changed the course of human thought forever. Not despite his foolishness, because of it. There is a quote from Shakespeare that captures this perfectly. The fool thinks he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool. It sounds like a riddle, but it is actually a blueprint. The moment you stop believing you have the answers is the moment you become capable of finding them. Socrates was not wise because he had knowledge. He was wise because he had something far rarer: honesty about what he lacked. And in a world full of people pretending to know, the one person willing to say, "I do not know," turned out to be the only one worth listening to. Erasmus and the Praise of Folly. In 1511, a Dutch scholar named Erasmus wrote a small book that shook Europe. It was called In Praise of Folly, and in it, Folly herself takes the stage, introduces herself, and begins to argue that she is the most important force in human life. It was satire, but it was also something more. Because the arguments Folly makes are strangely difficult to dismiss. She begins with a simple claim: nobody ever praises Folly, so she will praise herself. And then she proceeds to show, with razor-sharp wit, that folly is not the exception in human life. It is the rule. It is everywhere. And without it, life would be unbearable. Friendship, she argues, is built on folly, because to love a friend, you must overlook their flaws. You must choose not to see the defects, the weaknesses, the irritating habits. That willful blindness is a form of foolishness, and without it, no friendship would survive. Marriage is the same: to commit your life to another person, knowing that they are imperfect, knowing that you are imperfect, knowing that the future is uncertain, that is not rational, that is folly, and yet it is also one of the most meaningful things a person can do. Erasmus saves his sharpest edges for intellectuals, scholars who spend their entire lives in libraries, chasing knowledge that a handful of people will ever care about, who believe that what they are doing is of supreme importance. These are the greatest fools of all. Not because the pursuit of knowledge is worthless, but because the pursuit of knowledge without self-awareness is just vanity dressed in a scholar's robe. Folly compares philosophers to theatre critics who walk onto the stage, pull off the actors' masks, and reveal that the performance is fake. Yes, they are technically correct. The performance is an illusion. But in removing the illusion, they have ruined the only thing that made the evening bearable. And that is the real argument at the heart of Erasmus's work. The illusions we carry, the small follies, the willful blindnesses, the irrational commitments, these are not bugs in the human system. They are features. They are what make life livable. They are what allow us to love, to hope, to try again after failure. The person who strips away every illusion and insists on pure rationality is left with a life that is technically accurate and emotionally barren. The fool, on the other hand, embraces the beautiful irrationality of being human. And perhaps that is not foolishness at all. Perhaps it is the deepest kind of sanity. The fool sees what the expert misses. There is a concept in Zen Buddhism called Shoshin. It translates to beginner's mind, and it describes something that sounds simple but is, in practice, almost impossibly difficult. It is the ability to approach a subject as if you have never encountered it before, with no assumptions, no framework, no preconceived answers, just open, quiet attention. When you are a true beginner, the world is full of possibilities. Everything is interesting because you do not yet know what is important and what is not. You ask questions that an expert would never ask because the expert already knows the answer or believes they do. You see connections that a trained mind would dismiss because the trained mind has been taught what to look for and what to ignore. But the expert has a problem. The more you know about something, the narrower your vision becomes. Your expertise becomes a lens, and like all lenses, it focuses your sight in one direction while blurring everything else. You stop seeing what is actually there and start seeing only what your training tells you should be there. This is why breakthroughs so often come from outsiders. The person who revolutionizes an industry is rarely the one with 30 years of experience in it. It is the newcomer who walks in and asks a question so basic, so seemingly foolish, that everyone else had stopped asking it a long time ago. You have experienced this yourself. There is a moment, at the very beginning of learning something new, where your mind is wide open. And then, slowly, as you acquire knowledge and skill, that openness begins to close. You start to know things, and knowing things feels good. But knowing things also means you have decided what is worth knowing and what is not. And in that decision, you have made yourself blind to everything you excluded. The beginner sees many possibilities, the expert sees few, the fool sees what the expert misses, not because the fool is smarter, but because the fool has not yet learned what to ignore. And there is a wisdom in that. A wisdom that cannot be studied or earned or taught. It can only be maintained by staying curious when the world rewards certainty, by remaining open when experience tempts you to close. Why the smartest people do the dumbest things. There is an assumption that lives quietly in most people's minds. It says that intelligence protects you, that the smarter you are, the less likely you are to make foolish decisions. That knowledge is a shield against error. But the evidence tells a different story. Some of the most catastrophic decisions in history were made by brilliant people, educated people, people who had every resource, every credential, and every advantage. And yet they walked straight into disaster with absolute confidence. The reason is not complicated, but it is deeply uncomfortable. Intelligence does not eliminate foolishness. It reorganizes it. A highly intelligent person who falls into a bias does not stumble the way an ordinary person might. They construct an elegant, airtight argument for why they are right. They build a castle of logic on a foundation of flawed assumptions. And the castle looks so impressive that nobody thinks to check the foundation, including the person who built it. This is what psychologists sometimes call the intelligence trap. The smarter you are, the better you are at convincing yourself, at rationalizing decisions you made for emotional reasons, at finding evidence for conclusions you reached before you started looking. Your intelligence becomes a tool in service of your biases rather than a weapon against them. You have met these people. The brilliant friend who stays in a relationship everyone else can see is destroying them, and who has a perfectly reasoned explanation for why it is fine. The genius investor who ignores every warning sign because their model says the numbers will work. The academic who is so deep in their framework that they cannot see the reality standing right in front of them. Intelligence without humility is just foolishness with better vocabulary. The truly wise person is not the one with the most knowledge. It is the one who treats their own certainty with suspicion, who holds their conclusions lightly, who knows that the smartest thing they can do is leave room for the possibility that they are wrong. Because the fool is not always the person who knows the least. Sometimes the fool is the person who knows the most and has forgotten how to doubt. 2 ways to be fooled. There is a line that sounds like a riddle until you realize it is describing the way most people move through the world. There are 2 ways to be fooled. One is to believe what is not true. The other is to refuse to believe what is true. The first kind of fool is the one we recognize easily. He is the person who falls for the lie, who trusts the wrong voice, who accepts a story without checking whether it holds together. We see this kind of foolishness and we feel a comfortable distance from it. We tell ourselves we would not fall for that. We are too smart, too careful, too aware. But the second kind of fool is far more dangerous and far more common. He is the person who sees the truth and turns away from it, who is presented with evidence, with reality, with something undeniable, and finds a way to deny it anyway, not because the truth is hidden from him, but because accepting it would require him to change. And change is the thing most people fear even more than being wrong. You know this fool. You might be this fool right now, in some area of your life you do not want to examine too closely. The relationship you know is not working, but refuse to leave. The career you know is draining you, but refuse to change. The belief you know has cracked, but refuse to release. This is not a failure of intelligence. It is a failure of courage. Because seeing the truth is easy. Almost everyone can see it eventually. The hard part is not the seeing. The hard part is the accepting, the rearranging, the willingness to let the old structure fall apart so that something more honest can take its place. The first fool is simply uninformed. Time and experience will often correct him. But the second fool is something else entirely. He is informed and unwilling. He has the truth in his hands and puts it down because it is too heavy to carry. And that is the quiet tragedy of the second kind of foolishness. It is not about what you do not know, it is about what you refuse to know. And the longer you refuse, the heavier it gets. The court jester, the only one allowed to speak. In medieval Europe, there was a figure who held one of the strangest positions in any royal court. He was not a knight, he was not an advisor, he was not a priest, he was the jester, and his job was to make the king laugh. But that was only the surface of what he did. Beneath the bells and the colourful costume, beneath the juggling and the acrobatics, the court jester held a privilege that no one else in the kingdom possessed. He was allowed to tell the truth, not politely, not carefully, not wrapped in diplomacy. The jester could say what no advisor, no general, no nobleman would dare to say. He could mock the king to his face. He could point out failures. He could name the thing that everyone in the room could see but no one would speak, and the king tolerated it, sometimes even welcomed it. Why? Because the king understood something that most people in positions of power eventually learn, if they are honest enough to admit it. The people around you will not tell you the truth. They will tell you what you want to hear. They will agree with your decisions even when those decisions are leading toward disaster. They will smile while the kingdom burns, because the cost of honesty is too high when the person you are being honest with holds your fate in his hands. The jester existed to break that silence, to be the one voice in the room that could not be punished for speaking plainly. He was a pressure valve for a system that would otherwise suffocate under its own politeness. To make his unique role visible, the jester carried a bauble, a small scepter with a miniature head on it, a mock version of the king's own scepter. He wore a cap with bells instead of a crown. He was a living parody of power. And that parody gave him permission to say what power could not say to itself. But not all jesters survived their honesty. Some pushed too far. Some said the thing that was true but unbearable. And they were punished for it, sometimes with their lives. Because that is the risk the truth-teller always carries. The freedom to speak is never quite as free as it appears. The line between entertaining honesty and dangerous honesty is thin. And it moves depending on the mood of the person in power. You see this same dynamic everywhere today, in workplaces where only one person is willing to name the real problem, in families where only one voice says what everyone else is thinking, in friendships where one person always tells the truth and the rest remain comfortable. That person is the jester. And they are usually the most valuable person in the room, not because they are the smartest, but because they are the only one willing to pay the cost of honesty. The Feast of Fools. Once a year in medieval Europe, something extraordinary happened. The rules stopped. All of them. Social hierarchies were turned upside down. The lower clergy, the servants, the people at the very bottom of the order were allowed to become the people at the top. They parodied sacred rituals. They mocked the church. They ridiculed the powerful. They said and did things that on any other day of the year would have been punished severely. It was called the Feast of Fools. And it was not an accident. It was not a rebellion that slipped through the cracks. It was designed. It was permitted. In some places, it was encouraged. The reason was purely psychological. The people who built these systems understood something about human nature that we often forget. Repression does not eliminate desire, it stores it, it compresses it, and if there is no release valve, eventually it explodes. The Feast of Fools was that release valve. By allowing one day of total inversion, one day where the fool could be king and the king could be mocked, the system ensured that the remaining 364 days could function without uprising. It was controlled chaos in service of long-term order. Eventually, the church shut it down, the celebrations were driven underground, but the human need they served did not disappear. It never does, because every system that demands conformity also creates pressure. And that pressure has to go somewhere. You see echoes of this everywhere. In the office where people are polite and professional for months until someone finally breaks and says what everyone has been holding in. In cultures that celebrate certain holidays with wild excess, not because excess is the goal, but because the rest of the year demands so much restraint. The fool does not just exist to entertain. The fool exists because without him, the seriousness of the world would crack under its own weight. And when a society stops making room for its fools, it does not become more orderly, it becomes more fragile. The fool who speaks when everyone is silent. There is a moment that happens in almost every group, every organization, every family. A truth exists. It is visible to nearly everyone, and no one says it, not because they cannot see it, but because the cost of saying it feels too high. So the room stays quiet, and the truth sits there, growing heavier with every second of silence. Then someone speaks, and in the instant they do, the room rearranges itself around them, sometimes with relief, often with discomfort, occasionally with hostility, because the person who breaks the silence is not thanked for it. Not at first. At first, they are the fool. They are the one who said the thing that was not supposed to be said, the one who disrupted the careful balance that everyone had agreed, without ever agreeing, to maintain. There is something genuinely heroic about this. Not in the dramatic, cinematic sense, in the quiet, human sense. Because speaking the truth when no one else will is not an act of arrogance. It is an act of vulnerability. You are exposing yourself to judgment, to ridicule, to the possibility that the room will turn on you and decide that you are the problem rather than the thing you named. And yet, when someone finally says the thing that needed to be said, there is a strange and immediate relief. People exhale. Shoulders drop. The tension that had been building in the room begins to dissolve. Not because the truth is pleasant, but because the silence was worse. This is the fool's gift, not intelligence, not strategy, just the willingness to speak when speaking is uncomfortable, to say the thing that everyone else knows, but no one else will voice. You have been in these rooms. You have felt the weight of those silences. And you have watched the fool step forward, say the obvious thing, and change the temperature of the entire space. And if you are honest with yourself, you also know the rooms where you stayed quiet, where you saw the truth and looked away, where you chose comfort over honesty and told yourself it was not your place. The fool does not wait for it to be his place. He simply speaks, and the room is never the same after. The natural fool versus the professional fool. Not all fools are the same. Throughout history, two distinct types have emerged, and understanding the difference between them reveals something important about the nature of truth itself. The first is the natural fool. This is the person who speaks truth without intending to. He is not strategic. He is not calculating. He simply lacks the social filters that tell most people what to say and what to hold back. He walks into a room and says the emperor has no clothes, not because he is brave, but because it genuinely did not occur to him that he was supposed to pretend otherwise. The natural fool follows his heart. He sees the world as it is, unmediated by social expectation, and he reports what he sees with an innocence that can be disarming. He does not mean to disrupt. He does not mean to embarrass. He is simply being himself. And in being himself, he reveals the gap between what people say and what people actually mean. The second type is the professional fool. This is the court jester, the satirist, the comedian who crafts their words with precision to deliver an uncomfortable truth inside the wrapping of a joke. The professional fool knows exactly what he is doing. He understands the social rules perfectly, which is why he is so effective at breaking them. He follows his mind. The natural fool tells the truth because he does not know how to lie. The professional fool tells the truth because he knows that a joke is the only container strong enough to hold it without breaking the room apart. Both are necessary. The natural fool reminds us that truth does not require skill or strategy. It only requires the absence of pretense. The professional fool reminds us that truth, delivered without care, can be destructive. That sometimes the most important truths need to be disguised before people are willing to hear them. You have known both types, the friend who says something painfully honest without realizing the impact, and the friend who makes you laugh at something you are not ready to face. One catches you off guard, the other eases you into it, but both leave you standing in the same place, face to face with something you were avoiding. The greatest fools in history have often been far cleverer than the people who laughed at them. Because the real secret of the fool is not that he lacks understanding, it is that he understands something the rest of the room has chosen to ignore. Shakespeare's Fool in King Lear. In one of the darkest tragedies ever written, William Shakespeare placed a fool at the center of the story, not as comic relief, not as a distraction from the weight of the narrative, but as the only character who sees clearly while everyone else is blind. In King Lear, an aging king decides to divide his kingdom among his 3 daughters, based on how well they flatter him. It is a foolish decision by any measure, and the fool, his companion, knows it immediately. But the fool does not confront the king with a lecture or a logical argument. He uses riddles, he uses jokes, he wraps the truth in wordplay and absurdity because he knows that the king will not hear it any other way. The fool tells Lear that he has made himself smaller than his own shadow, that he has given away everything that made him powerful and kept nothing for himself, that the daughters who praised him most are the ones who care the least, and he says all of this not from a position of strength, but from a position of utter dependence. The fool has no army, no wealth, no title. He survives entirely on the king's tolerance, and yet he is the only person in Lear's world who tells him the truth. There is something deeply moving about this relationship. The most powerful man in the kingdom and the most powerless man in the kingdom, bound together by a strange and necessary intimacy. Lear needs the fool not because the fool makes him laugh. He needs the fool because the fool is the only mirror that is not distorted by ambition, fear, or flattery. When Lear is stripped of his power, abandoned by the daughters he trusted, and left to wander in a storm, the fool stays with him. Everyone else leaves. The knights, the servants, the loyal subjects, they all find reasons to go, but the fool remains. Because the fool's loyalty was never to the crown, it was to the man. And then, quietly, the fool disappears from the play. Shakespeare never explains where he goes. He is simply gone. And Lear, now truly alone, begins to descend into madness, as though the fool was the last thread connecting the king to reality. And once that thread was severed, there was nothing left to hold him. It is one of the most haunting character relationships in all of literature because it shows us something we do not want to admit, that the voice we most need to hear is often the one we least want to listen to, and that the person we dismiss as a fool may be the only one keeping us sane. The sad clown paradox. There is a story often told about a man who goes to see a doctor. He is depressed, he cannot sleep, he finds no joy in anything. Life feels heavy and grey and meaningless. The doctor listens carefully and then says, I have a suggestion. There is a great clown performing in town tonight. He is the funniest man alive. Go and see him. He will lift your spirits. The man looks at the doctor and says, "But doctor, I am that clown." This story, in one version or another, has been told for centuries, and it endures because it captures something that psychology has only recently begun to study in depth: the connection between comedy and suffering, between the person who makes the world laugh and the darkness they carry inside. Psychologists call it the sad clown paradox, and the pattern appears with uncomfortable frequency. Comedians, performers, entertainers, the people whose entire purpose is to create joy in others, report higher rates of depression, anxiety, and emotional disturbance than the general population. The reason is not complicated, but it is painful. Comedy, for many people, begins as a survival mechanism. The child who learns that making people laugh protects him from being hurt. The teenager who discovers that humor deflects attention away from his pain. The adult who builds an entire career on the ability to transform suffering into laughter so skillfully that no one ever sees the suffering underneath. The clown puts on a face, and then he cannot take it off, because the audience does not want to see what is behind it. They want the performance. They want the laughter. They want the fool who makes everything lighter. And the clown learns, slowly and quietly, that his real self is not what people want. Only his mask is welcome. This is the cost of one-sidedness. When a person becomes only one thing, when they are defined entirely by a single role, the parts of themselves that do not fit that role are pushed into the shadow. They do not disappear, they grow, and they grow darker the longer they are ignored. The sad clown is not sad because he is a clown. He is sad because he has forgotten that he is also something else, something more, something that the laughter was supposed to protect, not replace. And when you understand this, you begin to hear comedy differently. Behind every joke, there is a question. Behind every laugh, there is a cost, and the person who makes you feel the lightest may be carrying the heaviest weight in the room. Laughing with versus laughing at. There is a difference between two kinds of laughter, and the difference matters more than most people realize. The first is the laughter that connects. It is the laughter that happens when someone says something true, something vulnerable, something imperfect about themselves, and the room responds not with judgment, but with recognition. You laugh because you see yourself in what they said, because their honesty gave you permission to be honest too. This is what it means to laugh with someone. It is an act of connection. It opens people up. The second is the laughter that separates. It is the laughter that happens when someone is exposed, embarrassed, or diminished, and the room responds with amusement at their expense. You laugh because you are relieved it is not you, because their failure makes you feel safer, smarter, more competent by comparison. This is what it means to laugh at someone. It is an act of distance. It closes people off. The fool and the trickster represent these two kinds of laughter perfectly. The fool laughs at himself. He offers his own imperfection as a gift. He stumbles. He fails, he says the wrong thing, and he lets you see all of it without shame. And in doing so, he removes your mask too. Because if he can be that open, that unprotected, then maybe you do not need to perform either. The fool's laughter builds trust. The trickster laughs at others. He watches for weakness, waits for the stumble, and then strikes with wit so precise it looks effortless. The room laughs. But the laughter has teeth. It does not connect people. It ranks them. Someone is up, someone is down, and the trickster is always making sure he is on top. You know both of these laughters. You have felt the warmth of the first and the sting of the second. And if you are honest, you have also been on both sides. You have been the person who laughed with someone and the person who laughed at someone. And you know, even if you have never articulated it, that only one of those laughters left you feeling better about being human. The fool's laughter heals. The trickster's laughter wounds. And the kind of laughter you choose says more about who you are than almost anything else. The trickster archetype. The trickster wears the fool's face, but behind it, something very different is happening. Where the fool stumbles into truth by accident, the trickster manufactures chaos by design. He is the figure who appears in every mythology, every culture, every era. Loki in Norse legend, Coyote in Native American tradition, Anansi in West African folklore. The trickster is clever, deceptive, and always playing a game that only he fully understands. In mythology, the trickster serves a purpose. He disrupts the established order. He breaks rules that have become too rigid. He introduces chaos into systems that have grown stagnant, and through that disruption, he forces change. The world after the trickster passes through is never the same as the world before, but the trickster is not benevolent. He does not break rules for the benefit of others. He breaks them because he enjoys it. There is a German word for the pleasure the trickster feeds on. Schadenfreude. It means harm joy. The quiet satisfaction that comes from watching someone else fail. The trickster feels this pleasure and hides it. He may console you when you stumble. He may offer sympathy when things go wrong. But inside, there is a part of him that is feeding, not on your pain exactly, on the confirmation that he is clever enough to avoid it. You know this figure, not from mythology, from your own life. The colleague who sets traps with words and watches people walk into them. The friend who tells a story about you that is technically true but framed in a way that makes you look small. The person who plays dumb so that others will underestimate them and then uses that underestimation as a weapon. The trickster and the fool look alike on the surface. Both break social rules. Both create laughter. Both say things that others would not. But the difference is in the intention. The fool acts from innocence. The trickster acts from strategy. The fool disrupts because he does not know the rules. The trickster disrupts because he knows the rules better than anyone and has decided to use them as tools. And that is why the trickster is both fascinating and dangerous. He reminds us that not every smile is kind, not every joke is harmless, and not every fool is actually a fool. Why we fear clowns. A clown is supposed to make you happy. His face is painted into a permanent smile. His movements are exaggerated and playful. His entire purpose is joy. And yet, for a surprising number of people, clowns provoke not laughter, but dread. The fear of clowns, known as coulrophobia, is one of the most common specific fears in the modern world. And it raises an interesting psychological question. Why would something designed to be joyful become a source of terror? The answer lies in what psychologists call the uncanny valley, the deep discomfort humans feel when something looks almost right, but not quite. A clown's painted face mimics human emotion, but it is fixed. The smile does not change when the eyes are sad. The exaggerated features create a face that is human enough to be familiar, but distorted enough to feel wrong. Your brain recognizes a face, but it also recognizes that the face is lying. And that is the root of the fear, not the makeup, not the costume, the disconnect, the sense that what you are being shown on the surface does not match what is happening underneath. A face that says, happy when the person behind it may feel anything. Anger, sadness, emptiness. You cannot tell. And the inability to read the true emotion behind a mask is deeply unsettling to the human nervous system. This is why the evil clown has become one of the most powerful figures in horror, because it takes the thing that was supposed to be safe and reveals that safety was always an illusion. The clown who entertains children by day and becomes something monstrous by night is terrifying precisely because it mirrors a fear we all carry. That the people who smile at us may not mean it. That the warmth we are shown may be a performance. That behind any mask, there could be anything. The clown becomes frightening when his light side and his dark side are separated. When he is forced to be only one thing, only joyful, only entertaining, only the performer, because a person who is only light has no place for their darkness to go. And the darkness does not disappear just because you refuse to show it. It waits, and when it finally emerges, it comes out twisted, unrecognizable, monstrous, not because the person was always monstrous, but because they were never allowed to be whole. Kierkegaard's Burning Theatre. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once told a story that sounds like a joke but is actually a warning. A fire breaks out backstage in a theatre. The flames are spreading. The situation is urgent. The clown, already in costume from the performance, rushes onto the stage to warn the audience. He tells them the theatre is on fire. They need to leave. Now. The audience laughs. He says it again, more urgently. The fire is real. This is not part of the show. You need to get out. The audience laughs harder. They applaud. They think it is his best performance yet. Kierkegaard concluded the story with a line that has lingered for over a century. He said he believed that is how the world will end, to the sound of applause from people who think it is all a joke. This parable is about something deeper than a fire. It is about the moment when truth has been so thoroughly dressed in the costume of entertainment that people can no longer tell the difference. When the messenger has been cast as a fool for so long that even when his message is deadly serious, no one can hear it as anything other than performance. You see this happening now. In a world saturated with information, irony, and entertainment, the line between what is real and what is spectacle has become almost invisible. Warnings are delivered with humor because that is the only way they will be shared. Serious problems are discussed with sarcasm because sincerity feels uncomfortable. And somewhere along the way, the audience has learned to laugh at everything, even the things that are on fire. The clown in Kierkegaard's story is not a failure. He did what he was supposed to do. He told the truth. He spoke clearly. He warned the audience with everything he had, but he was wearing the wrong face, and the audience had been trained to laugh at that face no matter what it said. This is the tragedy of the fool who has been reduced to only a fool. When a person is seen as nothing more than entertainment, their words lose weight. Their warnings lose urgency. Their truth becomes invisible, hidden behind the very costume that was supposed to give them the freedom to speak. And so the theatre burns, and the audience claps, and the clown stands on stage, watching, knowing that he said everything he could, and it was not enough. Because sometimes the most important truth in the room is the one being delivered by the person nobody takes seriously. The Tarot Fool, Card 0. There is an image that has survived for over 500 years. It shows a young man standing at the edge of a cliff. In one hand, he holds a white rose. In the other, a small bag tied to a stick, slung over his shoulder. He is looking up at the sky, not at the ground, not at the edge beneath his feet, at the sky. Behind him, a dog barks, trying to get his attention, trying to warn him, but the young man does not look down. He is the fool, card 0 of the tarot, and he is about to step into nothing. The tarot itself traces back to 15th century Italy, where illustrated playing cards called trionfi were used for entertainment and theatrical festivals. Over time, they became known as tarocchi, and the root of that word, taroch, translates simply to foolishness. So the tarot, in its very name, is the game of the fool, the journey of the fool. The entire deck is his story. There are 78 cards in a traditional tarot deck. The first 22 are called the major arcana, and they represent the great experiences and archetypes of human life. The Fool is the first card, numbered 0. The last card is the World, which shows a figure dancing inside a great laurel wreath, a symbol of wholeness and completion. The entire arc of the major arcana, from 0 to 21, is the Fool's journey from innocence to integration. But here is what makes the Fool's position so powerful. He is not card 1. He is card 0. 0 is not a beginning in the ordinary sense. It is the space before beginning, the potential before the act, the breath before the word. Zero contains everything and nothing at the same time. It is the empty circle, and the empty circle is one of the oldest symbols in human history. The ancient Egyptians depicted the Ouroboros, a serpent swallowing its own tail, forming a perfect circle. It represented eternity, the endless return, the idea that all endings are also beginnings. In that circle, past, present and future exist at once. And the fool, standing at card 0, stands inside that circle. He is the point before the journey begins and the point after the journey ends. He is both the first step and the last lesson. The white rose in his hand symbolizes innocence and purity. The small bag represents the few things he carries, his experiences, his memories, his potential, light enough to hold in one hand. The dog at his heels represents instinct, the part of him that senses danger even when his conscious mind does not. And the cliff represents the unknown, the space beyond what can be planned, predicted, or controlled. And the fool steps forward anyway, not because he is brave in the way we usually define bravery, not because he has weighed the risks and decided they are acceptable, but because he is so absorbed in the possibility of what lies ahead that the fear of falling has not occurred to him. There is something terrifying about that, and something beautiful. Because every meaningful thing you have ever done in your life began the same way, with a step you took before you fully understood where it would lead. The hero's journey begins with foolishness. The mythologist Joseph Campbell spent his life studying the stories that cultures tell across the world, and he found that beneath the surface differences, the languages, the settings, the names, nearly every great story follows the same pattern. He called it the monomyth. Most people know it as the hero's journey. It begins with a call to adventure. Something disrupts the ordinary world. A message arrives. A crisis emerges. A door opens that was not open before, and the hero must decide whether to step through it or stay where it is safe. The hero who answers the call leaves the familiar behind and enters what Campbell called the special world, a place of trials, dangers, and transformation. Here the hero must face his deepest fear, the thing he has avoided for years, sometimes for his entire life. He must confront it, survive it, and take from it something of value, and then he must return to the ordinary world and share what he has gained. This pattern appears in every culture, in every era, in every genre of storytelling, and at the very beginning of this pattern, before the hero becomes a hero, there is always a moment where he looks like a fool, because leaving safety looks foolish. Abandoning the known for the unknown looks reckless. Choosing discomfort over security looks irrational. The people who stay behind always have reasons, good reasons, sensible reasons, and the person who leaves cannot fully explain why they are going. They just know they have to. Think about the moments in your own life when you took a step that others questioned, the job you left when it looked stable, the relationship you walked away from when everyone said to stay, the path you chose that had no guarantee of success. In those moments, you looked like a fool to others, and perhaps to yourself. But the hero's journey tells us that foolishness is not the opposite of the journey. It is the beginning of it. No transformation starts with certainty. No growth begins with safety. The first step always looks reckless to the people who are not taking it. The fool is the precursor to the hero. He is the version of the hero before the trials begin. Before the dragon is faced, before the treasure is found, he is the raw material from which the hero is forged. And this is the part that most people miss. We celebrate the hero at the end of the story, when the dragon is slain and the treasure is won. But we forget that every hero began as someone who looked foolish, someone whose family doubted them, someone whose friends questioned them, someone who left behind everything stable and predictable because something unnamed was pulling them forward. If you are standing at the edge of something right now, if you are thinking about a change you have not yet made, a conversation you have not yet had, a leap you have not yet taken, then you are standing exactly where the fool stands. And the people around you may be telling you to be reasonable, to stay where it is safe, to think it through one more time. But Campbell's research showed across thousands of stories from every civilization on Earth that the people who listen to that advice never become the hero. They remain in the ordinary world, comfortable, safe, and unchanged. And if the fool never takes that foolish first step, the hero never exists at all. Parsifal and the Fisher King wound. There is a myth that has been told for nearly 1,000 years. It comes from the Arthurian legends of medieval Europe, and it tells the story of a young man named Parsifal. His name means young fool, and he earns it. Parsifal lives alone with his mother in a forest, sheltered from the world. He has never seen a knight. He has never heard of the court. He knows nothing of honor, duty, or adventure. He is innocent in the truest sense. Not stupid, untouched. One day, a group of knights rides past. Parsifal is mesmerized. He has never seen anything so magnificent. And in that moment, something awakens in him. He decides he will become a knight. His mother begs him not to go. She knows the world will wound him. But he goes anyway, because the call is stronger than the fear. He leaves the forest and enters the world. And the world does exactly what his mother feared. It wounds him. It confuses him. It tests him in ways he cannot understand. But through those trials, he begins to grow. Eventually, Parsifal arrives at a mysterious place, the Grail Castle. Inside, he finds the Fisher King, a ruler who has been wounded so deeply that he cannot live and cannot die. His kingdom has become barren. His land reflects his suffering. Everything around him is decaying because the wound inside him has not been healed. There is a ceremony that night, a sacred procession. The Holy Grail is carried through the hall. And there is a prophecy that says the Fisher King can only be healed when an innocent fool arrives and asks a specific question. Parsifal is that fool. He is the one the prophecy describes. He is standing in the exact place, at the exact time, with the exact power to heal the king. But he does not ask the question. His mother told him not to ask too many questions. His training told him to be polite and restrained. And so the young fool, caught between his instincts and his conditioning, stays silent. He sees the suffering, he feels the weight of the moment, but he does not speak. The next morning, the castle has vanished, and it takes Parsifal 20 years, 20 long and painful years, to find it again. When he finally returns, older and broken by the world, he asks the question he should have asked the first time. He asks the Fisher King, "Whom does the Grail serve?" And in that moment, the king is healed. The land comes back to life. Peace returns. The question was never about information. It was about compassion. It was about seeing someone else's suffering and having the courage to acknowledge it. The fool's power was never in knowledge. It was in the willingness to connect with another person's pain. And the tragedy of the story is not that Parsifal was a fool, it is that when the moment came, he was not foolish enough to trust himself. The Fisher King wound inside you. The myth of Parsifal is not just a story about a knight and a king, it is a map of something that happens inside every person. The Fisher King wound is the moment when innocence meets reality. It is the graduation, as Jungian psychologists describe it, from naive consciousness into self-consciousness. It is the moment when a child realizes that the world is not what they were told it was, that people are not always kind, that effort does not always lead to reward, that love does not always protect you. Every person carries this wound. You received yours in adolescence or perhaps earlier. It was the first time you understood that life contains suffering that cannot be avoided, that there are things you cannot fix, people you cannot save, truths you cannot unsee. And that understanding changed you. It had to. Because once you have seen the cracks in the world, you cannot pretend the surface is smooth. The Fisher King sits in his castle, surrounded by beauty and abundance, but unable to participate in any of it. The Holy Grail is right there, carried past him every night, and he cannot drink from it. This is perhaps the deepest form of suffering there is, not the absence of good things, but the inability to receive them, to be surrounded by everything you need and still feel empty. You know this feeling, the moment when everything in your life looks fine from the outside, the job, the relationships, the achievements, but inside, something is disconnected. You are sitting in your own Grail castle, watching the procession pass, and you cannot reach out and take what is being offered. Maybe it is the success that does not feel like success, the love that does not feel like love, the life that checks every box but still feels hollow. You have done everything right. You have followed the instructions, and still, something essential is missing, not something you can name, not something you can buy or earn or build, something deeper, something that the world you have constructed does not have room for. The myth tells us that this wound cannot be healed by effort. The Fisher King has tried everything. He has consulted every advisor, pursued every remedy. Nothing works, because the wound is not physical. It is a wound of meaning, and meaning cannot be manufactured. It can only be discovered. And it is discovered, according to the story, by the fool, not by the wise man, not by the warrior, not by the scholar, by the innocent, unadapted, ridiculous part of yourself that you have spent your adult life trying to suppress. The part that does not know the rules. The part that asks questions that seem too simple, too obvious, too naive. Jungian analyst Robert A. Johnson put it this way: a person must consent to look to the foolish, innocent, adolescent part of himself for his cure. The inner fool is the only one who can touch the Fisher King wound. The very thing you are most ashamed of, the part of you that feels small and unsophisticated and unworthy, is the part that holds the key. Ivan the Fool. In fairy tales around the world, there is a pattern that repeats so often it feels like the universe is trying to tell us something. 3 brothers set out into the world. The first 2 are clever, strong, ambitious. They have plans, they have strategy, they have every advantage. The third is the fool. He is laughed at, he is dismissed. He is the one nobody expects anything from. And yet, in story after story, across cultures and centuries, it is always the fool who wins in the end. One of the most beloved versions of this story comes from Russian folklore. The writer Leo Tolstoy adapted it into a tale called Ivan the Fool. In the story, Ivan is the youngest of 3 brothers in a peasant family. He is simple. He is kind. He forgives easily, even when he is taken advantage of. While his brothers chase money and military power, Ivan stays on the farm, working the fields, caring for his aging father and his mute sister. When the 2 older brothers run out of money, they demand their share of their father's wealth. The father objects because it is Ivan and his sister who have done the real work. But Ivan, without resentment, agrees to give his brothers whatever they want. The old devil watches this family and is disturbed by the lack of conflict. He sends a little devil to each brother, and soon enough, the older brothers are consumed by greed and ambition. They fall into trouble. They suffer the consequences of their cleverness. Ivan, meanwhile, is struck with illness by the devil assigned to him, but he does not stop working. He does not complain. He simply endures and continues. One by one, the 3 little devils fail to break him. And as Ivan finds each one, they beg for their lives and offer him any wish. Ivan, with no greed in his heart, simply says, "God bless you," and the devils vanish. He is given the power to turn leaves into gold and straw into soldiers, but instead of hoarding his gifts, he gives the gold to the village peasants and uses the soldiers to sing and dance for people's enjoyment. Finally, the old devil himself comes for Ivan, and he too is defeated, not by strength, not by cunning, by the one thing the devil cannot comprehend, genuine, uncalculating goodness. Ivan marries the Tsar's daughter. The man who had nothing receives everything. The brothers who chased the world end up with nothing, and the fool, the one everyone laughed at, becomes the hero. This is not just a fairy tale. It is an argument that the qualities we dismiss as foolish, simplicity, kindness, generosity, forgiveness, are not weaknesses to be overcome. They are powers that the clever and the ambitious cannot access, because those powers only work when they are genuine, and genuineness is the one thing that cannot be faked. You see this story repeated across cultures, across centuries, in 100 different languages. The youngest brother who is mocked, the simpleton who is underestimated, the innocent who is dismissed. And every time, it is the fool who wins the kingdom. Not the warrior, not the strategist, the fool. It would be easy to dismiss this as wishful thinking, as a story that powerless people tell themselves to feel better. But maybe there is something deeper at work. Maybe these stories persist because they reflect a truth that the rational mind does not want to accept. That cleverness without heart is a dead end. That the person who calculates every move has already lost the thing that makes life worth playing. And that sometimes the simplest person in the room, the one who does not even know they are in a competition, is the only one who was never competing against themselves. Don Quixote, when foolishness becomes madness. There is a man in a small village in Spain. He has spent years reading books of chivalry, stories of knights and honor and noble quests. And at some point, the stories stopped being stories. They became reality. The line between what he read and what he saw dissolved completely. And the man decided he was a knight. He called himself Don Quixote. He put on a rusted suit of armor. He mounted a thin, aging horse. And he rode out into the world to right wrongs, defend the innocent, and defeat the wicked. The only problem was that none of what he saw was real. In one of the most famous scenes in all of literature, Don Quixote encounters a row of windmills. But he does not see windmills, he sees giants, monstrous, threatening giants that must be defeated. And so he charges. He attacks the windmills with his lance, and the windmills, being windmills, throw him to the ground. This is the origin of the phrase tilting at windmills. It means fighting imaginary enemies, battling things that do not exist, spending your energy on threats that are only real inside your own mind. Don Quixote recruits a companion, a simple peasant named Sancho Panza, who sees the world as it actually is. Sancho knows the windmills are windmills. He knows the inn is not a castle. He knows the peasant woman is not a princess. But he follows Don Quixote anyway, partly for the promise of wealth, partly out of a strange loyalty that even he cannot fully explain. Throughout the novel, Don Quixote's good intentions cause harm. He tries to help and makes things worse. He tries to rescue and creates more suffering. He is not evil. He is not malicious. He is simply unable to see the world as it is. And that inability, despite his intelligence and his passion and his genuine desire to do good, makes him dangerous. This is the dark side of the fool. Not the fool who lacks knowledge, but the fool who has replaced knowledge with fantasy. The person so committed to their version of reality that they can no longer receive information that contradicts it, and the more passionately they believe, the more damage they do. At the end of the novel, something devastating happens. Don Quixote falls ill. He sleeps. And when he wakes, the madness is gone. He sees clearly for the first time. He realizes that he is not a knight, that the adventures were delusions, that he has wasted his life chasing phantoms, and the people around him, the ones who mocked him, the ones who called him a madman, suddenly change. They beg him to hold on to the fantasy. They tell him he really is a knight. Because now that the illusion is gone, what remains is unbearable. A broken old man in a bed, seeing himself clearly, with no beautiful story left to soften the view. He dies shortly after, and the narrator tells us, without sentiment, what killed him. Not illness, not age, an overdose of reality. This raises a question that has no comfortable answer. Is it better to see clearly and suffer, or to live inside a beautiful lie and feel alive? Is the fool who believes the illusion happier than the wise man who sees through it? And if the illusion gives a life meaning, purpose, and joy, can we really call it foolishness? Perhaps the truest form of wisdom is not choosing between truth and illusion. Perhaps it is learning which truths are worth carrying and which illusions are worth keeping. And perhaps the fool who cannot make that distinction is not so different from the rest of us. You carry your own windmills. We all do. The dreams you chase that others say are unrealistic. The beliefs you hold that the evidence does not fully support. The version of yourself that you imagine becoming, even though you do not know if that person is real. These are your private delusions, and maybe some of them are keeping you alive in ways you do not fully understand. The question is not whether you have illusions. Everyone does. The question is whether your illusions are carrying you towards something meaningful or holding you in place. Whether they are windmills you should stop fighting, or giants that really do need to be faced. The Fool's Paradise. In his novel The Idiot, the Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky set out to do something almost impossible. He wanted to portray a perfectly good man, not a strong man, not a clever man, a genuinely, completely good man. And then he wanted to put that man in the middle of a corrupt and cynical world and see what happens. The result was Prince Myshkin. A man returning to Russia after years in a Swiss sanatorium, treated for epilepsy and what the doctors of that era called idiocy. He arrives in St. Petersburg with an open heart, an honest tongue, and absolutely no understanding of how the social games around him work. Myshkin says what he thinks. He feels what he feels. He does not perform. He does not calculate. He does not hide behind a persona to impress others. And because of this, the people around him, people whose entire lives are built on performance and calculation, do not know what to do with him. Some are drawn to his innocence, others are repelled by it. Most settle on calling him an idiot. But Myshkin is no idiot. He sees people with a clarity that makes them uncomfortable. He understands suffering. He understands kindness. He understands the small, invisible acts that hold the world together. What he does not understand is why people choose cruelty when kindness is available, why they choose dishonesty when truth would serve them better, why they build walls around themselves and then complain that they feel trapped. Against Myshkin stands a character named Ippolit, a young man dying of tuberculosis. Ippolit is angry, nihilistic, and intellectually fierce. He has lost his will to live and has decided that the world is ugly and pointless. And he delivers one of the most provocative lines in all of Russian literature. It is better to be unhappy and know the worst than to be happy in a fool's paradise. This is the argument that every cynic makes, that truth, even brutal truth, is preferable to comfortable ignorance, that the person who sees the world as it is, no matter how painful, is superior to the person who lives in an illusion of goodness. But Dostoevsky does not let that argument win, because Myshkin, the fool, the idiot, the man who believes in beauty and goodness despite every reason not to, is the one who actually changes the people around him, not through arguments, not through philosophy, through presence, through small acts of compassion that require no justification. Dostoevsky gives Myshkin a line that has echoed through literature for over a century. Beauty will save the world, not truth. Not logic, not cynicism, beauty. It is a staggering claim, and most people, when they first encounter it, dismiss it as sentimentality, as the kind of thing a fool would say. But Dostoevsky spent his entire life inside the darkest corners of human experience. He was arrested for political subversion. He was sentenced to death and stood before a firing squad, only to be reprieved at the last second. He spent years in a Siberian prison camp. He knew suffering intimately, and after all of that, he still believed that beauty would save the world. That is not naivety. That is something earned through pain. It is the conclusion of a man who looked into the worst of human nature and decided consciously that the worst was not the whole story, that somewhere beneath the cruelty and the cynicism there was something worth believing in. And perhaps that is the fool's deepest secret. Not that he does not see the ugliness, but that he refuses to let the ugliness be the final word. The fear of looking foolish. There is an invisible prison that most people live in, and they do not even know it exists. It has no walls, no locks, no guards, and yet it is one of the most confining structures a human being can inhabit. It is the fear of looking foolish. You carry it with you into every room, every conversation, every meeting, every relationship, every moment where you could speak but choose not to. It is the voice that whispers, "Be careful. Do not say that. They will think you are stupid. They will laugh. They will judge. You will be exposed." And so you stay quiet. You hold back the question that could have changed the conversation. You swallow the idea that could have changed your life. You shrink yourself into something acceptable, something that will not draw attention, something that will not risk the one thing you fear most, being seen as a fool. But think about what that fear actually costs you. Every question you did not ask because it might sound stupid. Every opportunity you did not take because you might fail publicly. Every authentic thought you buried because it did not match what the room expected. Each of those moments was a small death, a small surrender of who you actually are in exchange for who the room wanted you to be. This fear is not irrational, it is ancient. In early human communities, being seen as incompetent or foolish could mean exclusion from the group. And exclusion meant death. Your nervous system still carries that programming. When you feel the flush of embarrassment, the tightening in your chest, the urge to disappear, that is your body responding to a threat that no longer exists in the way it once did. But the response is still powerful enough to control your behaviour. The irony is devastating. The fear of looking foolish is what actually makes you foolish. Because the person who never speaks up never learns whether their idea had value. The person who never takes the risk never discovers what they are capable of. The person who spends their entire life avoiding embarrassment arrives at the end of it with nothing but safety. And safety, as it turns out, is not the same thing as meaning. The fool in the tarot is not afraid of the cliff, not because he is reckless, but because he is looking at the sky. He is so focused on where he is going that the fear of falling has not taken root, and that is the choice. You can spend your life looking down, watching every step, making sure you never stumble. Or you can look up and risk being called a fool by everyone who was too afraid to look anywhere but at their own feet. The shadow of the fool. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who spent his life mapping the hidden landscape of the human mind, described something he called the shadow. It is the part of yourself that you do not want to see, the traits you have denied, the impulses you have buried, the aspects of your personality that you have decided are unacceptable, and so you have pushed them into the dark. The shadow does not go away when you ignore it, it grows. And the longer you refuse to look at it, the more power it gains over your behaviour. The fool has a shadow too, and it looks different from what you might expect. When you refuse to acknowledge the fool inside you, when you insist on being serious, competent, in control at all times, the fool does not disappear. He goes underground, and from there, he begins to express himself in ways you do not recognize as foolishness because they are disguised as something else. He appears as jealousy. You see someone else take a risk, speak honestly, live freely, and something inside you burns. Not because you disapprove, but because you wish you could do the same and you are too afraid. He appears as rigidity. You become inflexible, over-controlled, unable to adapt or play or improvise. Life becomes a series of obligations, and spontaneity feels like a threat. He appears as resentment. You begin to resent the people who seem lighter than you, freer than you, less burdened by the need to be taken seriously. You tell yourself they are irresponsible, but the truth is that they have integrated something you have rejected. He appears as shame, a deep, unshakable sense that if people saw the real you, the messy, uncertain, imperfect you, they would turn away. And so you keep the mask on tighter. And the tighter the mask, the more suffocating your life becomes. This is what happens when the fool is exiled from your inner court. The kingdom does not become more orderly, it becomes more brittle, more anxious, more defended against the very thing that could bring it back to life. Jung understood that every archetype has a light side and a dark side. The light side of the fool is spontaneity, courage, honesty, play. The dark side is what happens when those qualities are suppressed. They do not vanish, they ferment. And what ferments in the dark eventually becomes toxic. The only cure is the thing that feels most dangerous. Letting the fool back in. Allowing yourself to be imperfect, uncertain, ridiculous, and human. Not as a performance, not as a strategy. As an honest acknowledgement that the parts of you that you are most ashamed of might be the parts you need the most. When the fool falls off the cliff. The tarot fool stands at the edge. He looks up. He steps forward. And in most tellings, we are meant to admire that courage, the willingness to leap, the faith in the unknown, the refusal to let fear be the deciding factor. But there is another version of this story. The one where the fool does not land safely. The one where the cliff is real, the fall is real, and the consequences are real. Because foolishness is not always a disguised form of wisdom. Sometimes it is exactly what it looks like. A failure to pay attention, a refusal to reflect, a stubbornness so deep that it becomes its own kind of blindness. The fool who never looks down is not always brave. Sometimes he is simply unwilling to see what is obvious to everyone around him. The business that everyone can see is failing except the person running it. The relationship that everyone knows is toxic except the person in it. The belief that everyone can see is wrong except the person holding it. There is a fine line between the fool who leaps with faith and the fool who leaps with denial. From the outside, they can look identical. Both are standing at the edge. Both are stepping forward. Both are ignoring the warnings. But one has considered the risk and chosen to move forward anyway. The other has not considered the risk at all. And that difference, invisible on the surface, determines whether the leap leads to transformation or catastrophe. This is the tension at the heart of the fool archetype. He contains both possibilities within him, the possibility of a breakthrough and the possibility of a breakdown, the possibility of wisdom and the possibility of ruin. Which one emerges depends on a single factor, self-awareness. The fool who is aware of his own foolishness is transformed by it. He takes the leap knowing it might fail, knowing he might look ridiculous, knowing the outcome is uncertain. And that awareness makes the leap meaningful. The fool who is unaware of his own foolishness is consumed by it. He takes the leap believing it cannot fail, believing he is special, believing the rules do not apply to him. And that lack of awareness turns courage into carelessness. The cliff does not care which fool is standing on it. It treats them both the same. The difference is what happens after the fall. One gets back up with new knowledge. The other never understands why he fell. And perhaps the most important question you can ask yourself before any leap, before any great change, before any moment where you feel the pull to step into the unknown, is not whether you should jump. It is whether you have looked down first, not to be paralyzed by what you see, but to be honest about it, to acknowledge the risk, to feel the fear, and then to step forward anyway, with your eyes open, knowing that the fall is possible and the leap is still worth it. That is the difference between the fool who is transformed and the fool who is destroyed. Not the outcome, the awareness. The child inside the fool. Watch a child closely, not the way adults usually watch children, with supervision and correction and the constant impulse to teach. Watch the way you would watch a bird, with quiet attention, without agenda. You will notice something that most adults have lost. The child does not perform. She does not manage how she appears to others. She does not filter her curiosity through a checklist of what is appropriate to ask. She sees something interesting and she moves toward it. She feels something and she expresses it. She does not know yet that the world will try to train this out of her. The fool and the child share this quality. It is not naivety exactly, though it can look like naivety from the outside. It is an unmediated relationship with experience. The child has not yet learned to place a buffer between herself and the world. She has not yet built the persona, that carefully constructed mask that adults wear to navigate social life. And because of this, the child sees things that adults have trained themselves to overlook. She asks questions that adults have decided are too obvious to ask. She points at the thing in the room that everyone agreed not to notice. Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the most intense thinkers in the history of philosophy, wrote something surprising about this. He said that a person's maturity consists in having found again the seriousness one had as a child at play. Not the seriousness of work, not the seriousness of obligation, the seriousness of play, the total absorption, the complete engagement, the ability to be fully inside an experience without standing outside it, analyzing it, worrying about how it looks. This is what the fool offers, not a return to childhood, you cannot go back, but a recovery of something that childhood contained and adulthood often destroys. The willingness to engage with life directly, to be foolish enough to care deeply, to be naive enough to try without guarantee, to be childlike enough to see the world as if it is still full of things worth discovering. Think about the last time you were fully absorbed in something. Not watching the clock. Not thinking about what you should be doing instead. Not performing engagement for someone else's benefit. Just inside the moment completely. That was the child in you. That was the fool. And it was probably the most alive you have felt in months. The child has half entered the rational world. The madman has half escaped from it. And the fool stands somewhere between them, 1 foot in reality and 1 foot in wonder. Perhaps the people who navigate life most gracefully are the ones who refuse to choose between the two, who keep 1 foot in each world, and who understand that the serious, productive, responsible self needs the foolish, playful, curious self far more than it would ever like to admit. The inferior function, your hidden treasure. Carl Jung mapped the human psyche into 4 basic psychological functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, intuition. Every person leads with one of these. It is their dominant function, the lens through which they see the world most naturally. And buried at the bottom, least developed and most neglected, is what Jung called the inferior function. If you are a thinking type, your inferior function is feeling. If you lead with intuition, your weakest area is sensation. The inferior function is the part of you that feels clumsy, underdeveloped, embarrassing. It is the thing you are worst at, the thing that makes you feel like a fool whenever you try to use it. And here is where Jung's insight becomes genuinely surprising. He believed that the inferior function is not just your weakest point. It is also your point of greatest potential growth. It is the doorway to the parts of yourself you have never explored, the bridge between your conscious mind and the vast, uncharted territory of your unconscious. The Jungian analyst Marie-Louise von Franz, who devoted much of her career to studying this, equated the fool directly with the inferior function. She wrote that the fool represents the part of the human personality that remained behind and therefore still has the original wholeness of nature. The fool is the piece of you that was never polished, never civilized, never made acceptable, And because of that, it still carries something that your developed, sophisticated, socially approved self has lost. Think about the areas of your life where you feel most foolish, the skills you cannot seem to develop, the situations where you feel out of your depth, the moments where everyone else seems competent and you feel like you are pretending. Those areas are not failures. They are openings. They are the places where your carefully constructed identity thins out enough for something deeper to come through. The fool in you is not the part that needs to be fixed. It is the part that connects you to everything your polished self has forgotten. The fool hero, von Franz wrote, represents the despised part of the personality, the ridiculous and unadapted part. But he also holds the secret key to the unconscious totality of an individual. He is the gate to the great treasure. Your greatest weakness and your greatest gift are often the same thing, wearing different faces depending on whether you are running from it or toward it. The fool who gets back up. There is a difference between the person who never falls and the person who falls and stands up again. And the difference is not what most people think. The person who never falls has not achieved something remarkable. He has simply never moved far enough from safety to be in danger. He has stayed inside the lines. He has kept his ambitions modest, his risks small, and his exposure to failure carefully managed. From the outside, he looks stable, competent, unshaken, but from the inside, he knows something he will never say out loud. He has not avoided failure. He has avoided trying. The fool falls constantly. He overreaches. He miscalculates. He says the wrong thing in the wrong room at the wrong time. He trusts people he should not have trusted. He takes paths that lead nowhere. And he does something that the careful person finds almost incomprehensible. He gets back up, not with a strategy for how to avoid the mistake next time, not with bitterness or shame. He gets back up with the same ridiculous openness he had before he fell. This is not stupidity. This is one of the rarest psychological capacities a human being can develop. The ability to fail without letting the failure define you. Most people cannot do this. When they fail, the failure becomes part of their identity. It attaches itself to them. They replay it. They analyze it. They carry it into the next room, the next attempt, the next relationship. The failure becomes a weight, and over time, the accumulated weight of all their failures makes every new attempt heavier than the last. Eventually, they stop attempting, not because they have run out of ability, because they have run out of willingness to feel that weight again. The fool does not carry this weight, and the reason is not that he does not feel the pain of failure. He does, but he does not attach his identity to his performance. He does not believe that a failed attempt makes him a failed person. He experiences the fall as an event, not as a verdict. And because of that, he is free to try again in a way that the ego-driven person is not. You have seen this in children. A child learning to walk falls hundreds of times, and each time she gets up without existential crisis. She does not think I am a person who falls. She thinks I am a person who is learning to walk. The failure is information, not identity. And because she treats it that way, she eventually walks. Adults lose this. Somewhere between childhood and the professional world, you learned to treat every failure as a reflection of your worth. A rejected idea becomes, I am not creative. A lost opportunity becomes, I am not good enough. A public mistake becomes, I am someone who fails. And once failure becomes identity, recovery becomes almost impossible. Because you are no longer trying to fix a problem. You are trying to fix yourself. And you were never broken. The fool sidesteps this trap entirely. Not through denial, not through positive thinking, through a fundamental orientation toward experience that says the fall is part of the walk. The mistake is part of the making. The embarrassment is part of the becoming. And so he falls, and he rises, and he falls again. And each time he rises, he is a little different, a little wiser, a little more familiar with the ground. And the person who watched from a safe distance, who never fell because he never moved, looks at the fool with something he does not want to name. It is not pity, it is not amusement, it is envy, because the fool has lived, and the careful man has only watched. The Holy Fool, Courage Beyond Conformity. In the Russian Orthodox tradition, there is a figure known as the Holy Fool. He is the person who renounces everything the world values, wealth, status, comfort, reputation, and chooses instead to live in a way that looks insane to everyone around him. He may dress in rags. He may sleep in the streets. He may speak in riddles or not speak at all. He may behave in ways that provoke confusion, disgust, or mockery. And that is exactly the point, because the Holy Fool has decided that the approval of the world is not worth the cost of silence. That truth matters more than comfort, that living authentically, even if it means being misunderstood by everyone, is preferable to living a beautiful lie that earns applause. The concept comes from the writings of St. Paul, who declared that God has made foolish the wisdom of this world. He urged people to become fools in the eyes of the world so that they might become truly wise. This was not a metaphor, it was a challenge. Stop measuring yourself by the standards that the world has given you. Those standards were not designed to make you whole. They were designed to make you useful. And useful and whole are not the same thing. The Holy Fool takes this challenge literally. He lives it in his body, in his daily existence, in every interaction. He is willing to be ridiculed, scorned, and rejected because he has found something that matters more than any of those things. And that something cannot be taken from him because it was never given by the world in the first place. You do not have to become a wandering mystic to learn from the Holy Fool, but you can recognize the principle at work in your own life. Every time you choose authenticity over acceptance, every time you speak your truth knowing it will cost you something, every time you refuse to shrink yourself to fit a space that was never built for you, the Holy Fool is not performing rebellion. He is not being different for the sake of being different. He has simply stopped allowing other people's comfort to determine his own behavior. And in a world that runs on conformity, that is the most radical thing a person can do. It is also, quietly, the most freeing. Your soul demands your folly. Carl Jung, toward the end of a long career spent mapping the depths of the human mind, wrote something in his private journal that was not published until decades after his death. The journal was called The Red Book, and it contained his most personal and unguarded thoughts. And in it, he wrote a single line that captures everything we have explored. The soul demands your folly, not your wisdom. Read that again. Your soul does not want the version of you that has all the answers. It does not want the polished, careful, defended version. It wants the foolish version, the one who takes risks without knowing the outcome, the one who asks questions that have no answers, the one who says yes to something before fully understanding what it will cost. This is why the journey of self-discovery is always considered foolish by those who have not taken it, because it does not follow the path that the world has laid out. Education, career, stability, retirement. That is the sensible path, the rational path, the path that earns approval and security. But the soul does not care about security. The soul cares about growth. And growth, real growth, the kind that changes who you are at the deepest level, never happens on the sensible path. It happens in the forest, in the unknown, in the place where the fool wanders without a map. And here is something the fool understands that the cautious person does not. Failure is not the end of the story. It is the middle of it. The alchemists of the medieval world had a saying, "In filth it will be found." They meant that the thing you are looking for, the gold, the treasure, the transformation, is not hidden in the places that are clean and comfortable and approved. It is buried in the place you least want to look, in the mess, in the mistake, in the humiliation that you would do anything to avoid. Every failure you have experienced contained something valuable, not the failure itself, but what the failure revealed, about your assumptions, about your blind spots, about the gap between who you thought you were and who you actually are. And that revelation, painful as it was, brought you closer to yourself than any success ever could. The fool does not avoid failure. He walks straight into it, sometimes knowingly, sometimes not. And because he does not carry the weight of needing to be right, he is free to learn from what goes wrong in ways that the careful, the protected, and the defended never will. The person who overthinks, who waits for certainty before they begin, remains stagnant, paralyzed not by danger, but by the fear of danger, suffering not from reality, but from imagination. Meanwhile, the fool is already 3 mistakes deep, and each mistake has taught him something that the person still standing at the starting line will never learn. You have felt the pull of the sensible path, the voice that says wait until you are ready. Wait until you know enough. Wait until the conditions are right. But the conditions are never right. You are never ready. And the knowledge you think you need can only be found on the other side of the action you are afraid to take. Your soul was not asking for certainty. It was asking for folly. And every day you withhold it, the wound inside you, the one that sits between who you are and who you were meant to become, grows a little deeper. The end of all exploring. We have travelled a long way together, through ancient Athens and medieval courts, through Russian novels and Spanish windmills, through fairy tales and tarot cards and the quiet hidden rooms of your own psychology, and now we arrive at the end, or what feels like the end. But the fool has taught us something about endings. They are never quite what they seem. The poet T.S. Eliot wrote that we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. This is the fool's journey. It is not a straight line from ignorance to knowledge. It is a circle. You leave home, you wander, you stumble, you fall, you get lost in forests and castles and questions that have no answers. And then, after all of it, you come back to where you began. But you are not the same person who left. And the place you return to is not the same place you left behind, because you see it now with new eyes. Eyes that have been opened not by wisdom, but by foolishness. Not by certainty, but by all the moments where certainty failed you and something deeper took its place. The tarot fool begins at card 0 and ends at card 21, the world. And then the journey begins again. Because wholeness is not a destination you arrive at. It is a process you participate in, over and over, with each new leap, each new question, each new willingness to look foolish in the pursuit of something real. You started this video, perhaps, thinking that the fool was someone else. The naive person, the reckless person, the one who does not know better. And maybe now you see it differently. Maybe now you recognize the fool in the mirror, the part of you that wants to play when the world says be serious, the part that wants to ask the obvious question when the room has agreed to pretend, the part that knows, somewhere deep and quiet, that the most important things in life were never reached by being careful. Remember the room we started in, the one where you said something and the silence told you that you had revealed yourself, that you had been a fool. That moment felt like a failure, like exposure, like the ground opening up beneath you. But look at it now, from the other side of everything we have walked through together. That silence was not punishment. It was initiation. It was the moment the mask slipped, and instead of the performance, something real was visible, something raw and unpolished and human. And maybe the people in that room did not laugh because you were foolish. Maybe they went quiet because for a brief moment, you were the only honest person there. The fool is not your enemy. He is not your weakness. He is the part of you that still believes the journey is worth taking, even when you cannot see where it leads. He is the part that dares to be imperfect in a world addicted to appearances. The part that would rather stumble forward than stand still forever. And the greatest fools, the ones who change the world, the ones who heal the wounded king, the ones who find the Grail, are not the ones who had all the answers. They are the ones who were brave enough to ask the question,